Okay. Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Fire Breathing Rob. We used to be called Conversations with Rob. Changed it up to spice it up a little bit. We are on some radio stations, and I appreciate them for having us on. And please subscribe to our podcast also, and share these interviews because we have a lot of people that are very valuable to our country and to the causes that they work for and support. So thanks for that. I have somebody that I'm very interested to talking to today. As a progressive myself, I think that she is a great ambassador to the progressive movement, and she is the chairwoman of the Democratic Party of Nebraska. This is Jane Fleming Kielub, and she is also on the board of Our Revolution and the president of Bold, Nebraska. And she just wrote a book recently called Harvest the Vote and How Democrats Can Win Again in Rural America. So Jane, thanks so much for coming on the program. We greatly appreciate having you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's a whole new world out there, right? There's going to be more of these Zoom interviews, I think, than any of us ever imagined.
Yeah, I watch Crystal Ball, who used to be on MSNBC online, and she's doing hers from home with her co-host. So I've been watching a lot of people doing that, so I agree with you. But you are in Nebraska right now, and we've heard a lot of states. I'm in the state of Florida, and we're bracing up for hopefully not a catastrophe, but I am worried with all the tourism we have in this state of some serious cases here. How is Nebraska handling the coronavirus right now?
Yeah, so, we're really focused right now on how our rural communities are going to be impacted. So we clearly have big urban centers, just like many other states. So Omaha and Lincoln are our big cities. And we have the UNMC, which is the kind of world-known kind of center that actually deals with these diseases. So we took all the Ebola patients, or many of the Ebola patients, when the Ebola outbreak was happening, and treated them. So they're working hand in hand with the government right now on how we can be dealing with this. But we have a lot of outbreaks in Nebraska. And being from a rural community, I'm worried about our rural hospitals. We already have very few rural hospitals to begin with. The rural hospital in Hastings, where I live, treats a bunch of smaller towns around us. So, our hospital beds, just like all hospitals, are 75, 80% full at any time. And if we see the outbreak, like all the modeling is going to show, our rural communities aren't going to be set up with the infrastructure to actually handle that.
All right, then thank you for informing us about that. I didn't know that the outbreak was extremely big in Nebraska, but I hear what you're saying. We have a lot of rural communities all over the country, in Nebraska, Iowa, all in the heartland, which you are coming from talking to us. So I do worry about that also. My take is, what is your opinion about President Trump? He starts out and says, warm weather will kill this. There was talk about saying it was a hoax, and in a pandemic, you can't come out and say that as a president of the United States, which people look to for guidance and advice. What is your take? And then he cut the billions of dollars of funding to the CDC in the next year's budget, 2021, which is really scary because this could be happening, especially with climate change, with all these issues coming around, all these illnesses. This could happen quite frequently. What's your take on the president's job so far during this crisis?
I think President Trump has been irresponsible and reckless, and he has treated the pandemic as he do everything that you've already said, call it a hoax, etc. One of the big issues from my perspective is that in 2018, he completely eliminated the pandemic response unit inside the White House, which could have been, at least trying to, inform the president that this was on the horizon and this was coming. So we spent 2 months as a nation pretending that this was going to go away, that it was going to be maybe a 2-week issue, and then everything would be fine. And you had President Trump and Fox calling it a hoax. And now he's trying to be presidential. He's been playing president the past couple of days, perhaps in his press conferences. But, you have almost 300,000 people who applied for unemployment just last week. That's going to double, triple, quadruple. It's not only restaurants and tourism and hotels, which I grew up in Plantation, Florida, so I know how important tourism is for the state of Florida. But you now have to worry about the food supply, right? So in Nebraska, we are farming and have meatpacking processing, which then provides food for every other state in the country. And what if all those folks start to get sick and those plants have to shut down? So I just don't think we are prepared yet as a nation for the trauma that we are going to be facing.
Also, Steve Mnuchin came out yesterday, the Treasury Secretary said there could be unemployment of 20%. And as you talked about, that's just going to go into a recession, and it's going to be a serious problem, not only for the president in his reelection campaign, but just for our country as far as people getting back to work. I know I've been out of work for almost 2 weeks now, and I have a lot of stuff I can do around the house, yard work and stuff, but I'm not making any money through that, which is a big problem. And we talked about unemployment benefits as it's doubling. That's scary for our country. I want to talk about this as somebody that's the leader of the Democratic Party in Nebraska. We saw the Democratic primaries go on March 17th in Florida, where I am, also in Illinois, in Arizona. There was a lot of progressive talkers that I listened to were very upset that those primaries went on because of the pandemic. And no one knows who has it. I'm a young person. I might, not even show any kind of signs of this illness. I could breathe on somebody, hug somebody, and give it to my parents who are in their late 60s and, kill them basically and not even know that. So I worry about that. Do you worry about that? I know your primary is not till May 12th rather, so it's a while away, and this hopefully will be eliminated as far as a crisis at that time. But if it is not, what would be your take about eliminating the election and moving it and postponing it, such as what Governor DeWine did in Ohio?
So any primary essentially from mid-May on should be moving to full and we have the capability. When I sometimes hear people say, oh, it's too late, we have to prepare the ballots, like, give me a break. It literally was just last week that candidates could still petition their name off the ballot. So we haven't even printed the ballots yet. And, some people say, oh, well, it's not in our law. We can send vote by mail applications, but we can't send ballots. Okay, well, if you can't call an emergency session to change that law and can't get the votes for that, then at the very least, do what the law allows us, which is to send a vote by mail application to every voter. So we're at least eliminating the amounts of people that are going to go to the polling location. I do get frustrated when I hear people say that, elections should be postponed or canceled, because quite frankly, I think that sets up a precedent for President Trump to use that in November. And I think as America, we should rise to the occasion and solve the problem. And the problem is we should be creating an all vote by mail system. And it's not complicated. We can do it. It's safe. It's secure. People will then be able to vote from the safety of their home. We obviously then need to make sure that our post office has enough resources to process that and then get that to the Election Commission. But these are all solvable problems. What's not good as leaders of the Democratic Party and elected officials in our states is to essentially put our head in the sand and hope, fingers crossed, that everything is fine come mid-May or June and July. It's not going to be fine. If you read all of the modeling and all the experts, this is going to continue for several months. And so we now can prepare for that.
I just feel like it's a little irresponsible, not just on Democrats, but on Republicans too. Our state has a Republican governor in Florida with Ron DeSantis. And I just think it's irresponsible because, as I said, we don't know who, has this illness, and it could, hurt, and especially in a state with a lot of elderly people such as Florida, letting all those people go to a ballot box. We saw in Illinois, there was reports of 2 hours of line waiting. I mean, I just think that's extremely irresponsible, and that's a Democratic governor over there. So there's just a real problem, I feel like, as far as, we're trying to make sure less people get this illness, not more people. And with these kind of issues going on in polling places, I agree with what you said, and Washington has done this. They've been hit hard with the pandemic, but they went to full voting with mail-in ballots. So kudos to them, and I agree with you that we need to do more of that. And I think if not, it's going to be a big problem. The last question on this topic is the DNC came out and said that they will cut delegates from the states that postpone their elections. We've seen a lot of states so far, about 6 or 7, postpone those elections. Ohio, Kentucky has, Louisiana, and a couple others. We saw this with the DNC in 2008 when Barack Obama was running, with Michigan and Florida moving up their primaries, where those delegates were cut in. What do you think the DNC, their issue is here? Do you think they're being responsible as far as doing this?
Yeah, so we actually have another call as state chairs tomorrow to be talking about some of this. And, it sounds so like minuscule to be talking about some of these kind of, we had to hold county conventions and state conventions and the national convention, all in order to elect our Democratic nominee. And so, there is this like technical process that we have to go through in order to follow our rules and bylaws. And I know that sounds silly to a lot of people with everything else happening, that we have to follow these rules and bylaws, and can't we just use common sense? So that's something as chairs we're trying to balance. Like in Nebraska, I'm going to put up a vote at our state central committee, which we have to have by phone and on internet this Saturday instead of in person, that we move to all phone and online county conventions, and then a paper ballot, in combination of a paper ballot and phone convention for our large state convention in our large counties. There's no other way to do it. We can't do it in person. We were supposed to be doing these in mid-May, and schools and libraries that we were going to hold these events in are closed. So I think the more responsible thing to do is for the DNC to say, which they have been saying to states, that you need to modify your delegate selection plan to now meet the crisis that's in front of us. I also think everybody should now just set the expectation that we're not going to have a big national convention. The whole week of, fancy celebrities and musicians getting on stage and us celebrating Democrats, that's not going to happen. I'm sure it's going to look more like each state's going to send one delegate, and we're going to carry our proxy votes, and it's going to be a one-day event, so we can technically go through that process to have a nominee. And as Democrats, we have to realize that that's the situation we're in. But I also, because I am a progressive and I consider myself a reformer within the DNC, we shouldn't let this moment then say all of these reforms that we want passed, we should just put off to the side. So I still think that we have to push for major bylaw changes at the DNC to make our party more accessible and to have people like you and I at the table in party leader positions.
Jane Kielib here on Fire Breathing Rob. Jane, as a person that's also a progressive like you, I was a very big Bernie Sanders supporter. I voted for him in 2016 and voted for him in Florida this year. I really believe in everything he says, and I believe in a movement, and I believe all of his policies will make America really great again. Not that it's not great now. But my question is, where do you think Bernie's went wrong? Or do you believe it was that, after Nevada, Bernie made that mistake where he didn't come out really forceful and say he's that front runner? And then in South Carolina, he knew he was going to lose big. And then after that, they had that coronation where Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke came out for Joe Biden. And so what do you think happened from 2016 to now as far as Bernie losing all that momentum now to where it's going to be really tough for him to win? I really hope he still does, but it's, honestly, it's hard.
Yeah, so I think so many things kind of happened, and then you added the virus on top of it. So it is clear that Senator Sanders represents anywhere from 30 to 45% of our party, which is a large chunk of our party. And we also, though, at the same time, have to honor and respect African-American voters who had their voice clearly heard. So as progressives, we're saying we want our voice heard, and Black voters are saying that they want their voice heard as well. So, maybe it's not going to be Senator Sanders' time to be president of the United States, but he has already transformed our party. And I think that he has to ensure that if Biden is going to be the nominee, that Biden's going to adopt, for example, Senator Sanders' climate plan. Vice President Biden, who I deeply respect, his climate plan is not good. It is a climate plan based in the 1990s and early 2000s. And he doesn't have anything in there about stopping fossil fuel development. And the reality is we cannot build any new pipelines, coal plants, fracking, if we're serious about attacking climate change. And Vice President Biden isn't there yet. So I think at this point, Senator Sanders is obviously going to make his own decision, and he has a whole movement of people behind him. And I think we can't turn our back now on party organizing. That's my big concern with all the Bernie supporters, is to make sure that we stay in there. I think some of the establishment hopes that we goes away, right? They hope that we get, disenfranchised and sad and leave. What would make the difference is what a lot of Jesse Jackson supporters did when he lost the campaign to be our nominee, was they stuck in there and they transformed the way the DNC was run. And that's what we need to do as well.
Senator Sanders, you've campaigned with him. He's been to Nebraska many times. My thing with Senator Sanders is I think he's just a great guy, and he just is, as I'm trying to put it the best way I can, is that he fights for all of the things that I believe in and you believe in, but he just doesn't want. He's not a fighter in the way he wants a takedown, knockdown, drag out guy like Donald Trump. I hate Donald Trump. He's not really my president, even though he is. But he's a guy that will go in there with his hands up and he will knock you out and go after you tooth and nail. We saw him do that against Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush, and the rest of the Republicans in that primary. Bernie just doesn't seem like he has that gene to go in there and just take somebody down. And do you think that's why? Like, because the media is basically against him, I'll say that. The people don't like him on there. They're with their millionaires and they want to be with their millionaire friends as far as the media goes. Do you feel like that's Bernie's problem, is he just didn't get in there and just take Joe Biden down right away? Obviously, there wasn't a debate after, with Super Tuesday after that South Carolina, so there wasn't time for him to do that. But in general, he's just not that kind of take down, drag out guy.
I think because Senator Sanders has fought for the issues that we all know our party needs to be standing on for the last, 30 to 50 years, is it's almost like it doesn't come natural for him that other people don't get that climate change is a serious issue, don't get the fact that we've been debating healthcare for every single American for the last 50 years, and yet we still haven't accomplished it. And so now we're at a crisis moment. So I think on the one hand, there's that. But I also think that, I was in a lot of the early primary states, Iowa, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Nevada. So I talked with a lot of those voters and helped facilitate caucuses and be there during the primary and debate process. And, this one African-American woman in South Carolina told me that Bernie had her heart, but that Biden had her soul. And she went on to describe that everything that Bernie Sanders talks about, she wants implemented, and that she wants to see Senator Sanders still involved leading our party. And yet she thought that she owed a sense of legacy to her ancestors to vote for Vice President Biden because she believed that he was the one who could essentially right the ship for 4 years and then pass the torch to a new generation. Right or wrong, I think that is how a lot of voters felt in this moment. And so my concern now is that people will say, see, our party isn't progressive. Because if we were progressive, they would have voted in Bernie. And I just don't believe that. And I don't believe that we should be turning our backs on those policies. So, I hope to see a Senator Sanders in leadership and his policies being adopted.
I'm going to end this topic on this because then I want to move to the book. I think the electability thing was a big loss for Bernie. I feel like he didn't just really come out and push that hard enough. And I think that is basically what you were saying with the black voter that you spoke to about that. Her saying that it's basically, in my thought process, that was an electability comment as far as that goes. And it's really sad because Bernie's won Republican vote, as we saw in 2016. He wins that demographic. He can go toe-to-toe to Trump. All the polls say that. So it's really sad. It really gets me upset and aggravated that people are, believe in all these things that they hear but these are older voters and some young voters too that just watch CNN, MSNBC, and a lot of them don't research. Now, there are a lot of older progressives too, so I don't want to put everybody in one box, but in general, that's the case where Bernie was doing really bad with older voters. But I want to move on to the book. All right. What made you want to write Harvest the Vote, and how can Democrats win rural America again?
Yeah. So I wanted to write the book because I saw so many books written about rural America where it was always kind of doom and gloom, or where it was biographies of somebody's personal story on how they overcame drug addiction and how their towns are filled with drug addicts and in closing factories. And that's true, right? I mean, that's true not only in rural America that we have drug issues and addiction issues, that's true in urban America as well. I really wanted to show a hopeful side of rural America where rural communities are combating climate change on the front lines, where we are embracing immigrants who are literally revitalizing small towns and breathing life into main streets. And I don't have rose-colored glasses on. We still have racism and economic issues, and poverty is actually worse in rural America than urban America. So we have all of those problems, but we also have a lot of solutions. And it's really basic, right? The Democratic Party has not been present in rural communities since the farm crisis in the 80s and early 90s. And so when you're not investing resources, when you're not bringing leaders to the rural communities, then they're not creating relationships with you, they don't trust you, and then they start to vote against you, because why would somebody vote for a party that hasn't been present in their community and isn't addressing their issues at the national level? So we as a party are actually, our platform is based on kind of issues of justice and fairness, and our rural communities believe in that as well. And so there's a lot of common ground that if we actually put money and candidates focused on this, we will win rural America again. We used to have Democrats elected in all these rural, states, especially in the plains and in the South. And we've lost that because we've stopped talking to rural voters.
We see from Nebraska to Iowa, Jane, a lot of farmers approve of Donald Trump. We heard a lot about a bailout and but those are the big agricultural companies that got that bailout money, not the small farms, family farms. Why is that? Why you feel like a lot of farmers are approving Trump?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One, there's still the cultural issues, there's no doubt, right? So it's easier for somebody not to say that they're really voting for Trump because of abortion and guns or immigration issues. So kind of, Democrats can fix healthcare, or that Democrats aren't good on the economy or national security, when sometimes it's the cultural wedge issues that as Democrats we don't do a good job talking about, or just being honest. Like when I'm in a room of rural voters that I know aren't all, Democrats, and I experienced this on the Keystone XL pipeline fight that we, still doing 10 years later, is, people, I'm honest with them that we are going to disagree on gun reform. And I am pro-choice and understand where they're coming from being pro-life voters. And when I say that, they then believe the other things that I'm saying. But Democrats sometimes go into these communities and pretend, oh, I'm a gun-toting Democrat, and and all this other nonsense, and create this like poll-tested message around abortion, rather than just being straightforward and honest that we're going to disagree on those issues. And here's where we agree. Like, I'm here fighting for clean water, for agriculture, and making sure that your property rights are protected from a foreign oil corporation. So that first, we have to be authentic and actually meet voters where they're at. And we have totally decimated state parties nationally under President Obama, who I loved. But because we didn't invest in state parties, we lost 1,200 senators, governors, House members, state legislatures under President Obama. So when I hear these lines sometimes from pundits saying, oh, if we elect, somebody like Sanders at the top of the ticket, we're going to lose all these down ballot races. Are you kidding me? We lose down ballot races when state parties and county parties don't have the resources to help be the backbone for vote by mail and all these other kind of, logistical things that campaigns and candidates need in order to win. So we know what to do as a party. I will say one of the fundamental reasons of why we're not doing this, because these are all kind of logical things that we should know that we need to do in order to reach rural voters and win again. We're not doing it because there's nobody in Washington, D.C. when these funding and strategic decisions get made from rural communities. And so those folks have their whole worldview is from an urban center. So they write off rural communities and rural candidates immediately because they don't see the path to victory. And if you live in a rural community, you know that path.
And thank you for telling me that. Jane, I want to talk about this I guess I live in urban America compared to you. Can you tell the people that live where I live, basically how big agriculture is really crushing all these local farmers?
Yeah. Family farmers and ranchers are facing real issues. And so, where our food supply used to be totally reliant on family farmers and ranchers, you now have essentially 4 big meat processing companies, people like Swift and Purdue and Tyson's and J&B. And then you have, on the other side, you have big corporations like Costco who are going into small towns, great and progressive, because kind of some of their worker policies, but they're hurting small family farmers and they're polluting water. So the $5 rotisserie chicken that people are buying at Costco, that is being grown by small rural communities. So Costco is going into communities like they did in Nebraska and said, we're going to use eminent domain to take land away from a family farm so we can build a waste lagoon for a processing plant that will process up to 2 million chickens a week. So that means 2 million chickens are also grown within, about 10 to 20 miles of that processing plant in these chicken barns. And it's this process called vertical integration, essentially where a family farmer has to get locked into a contract by a big corporation. So they then have no control over their product, over what they're feeding the chickens, over the barns that are being constructed, or the price that they're able to negotiate because they have to be locked into a contract. And family farmers are signing up to this, which would obviously is not good for them long term. But for the short term, many of them see that's the only way that they can survive is to sign a contract that locks in a 10-year contract for the price of their chickens, their hogs, their beef. So what we need to do is with our trade policies have to be more, we have to essentially level the playing field. One concrete way that we can do that, and folks in urban communities can kind of urge their members of Congress to support, is a policy called country of origin labeling, which would mean when you go buy chicken and beef and other, poultry products in the grocery store, it would say not only where the, meat was grown, but also where it was processed. Because right now, sometimes companies like Tyson's get, cute with their labeling and they talk about USA, but the reality is it was like processed in Mexico and then brought back to America. So we need country of origin labeling so family farmers and ranchers have more of a level playing field to get their products in the market.
Great. Thank you for saying that, because a lot of people don't know any of these things. And it's not just because they're ignorant, it's just because they,
Yeah.
haven't heard any of these issues. I want to go to this point. I feel like the only way to solve this problem is you got to break up these companies. These are big agricultural companies. We see this in tech too. To break it up and get money out of politics, because that's where all these corporations are doing. They're so big and then they're donating all this money to the politicians. Do you agree with that point?
100%. And that is the common ground with rural communities and our Democrats and our urban communities is that we hate big, right? Rural people, whether they're Republican or Democrat, they hate big corporations. They see big corporations swallowing up their small towns, whether it's through using eminent domain for a big corporation's private gain or this type of vertical farming integration practice that a lot of. So that we have to stand on, that we have to break up big banks, big tech, and big ag in order to create a level playing field for families again.
Agreed. So this is going to head to kind of your wheelhouse right now. We saw what happened in Iowa with the caucus debacle. Now, you guys used to have a caucus in Nebraska where they had the presidential selection with the caucus system, and then you changed that in 2018. Can you say why you changed that system? And also, was that because you kind of saw maybe the writing on the wall of what happened in Iowa before it happened?
Yeah, so I was on the Unity and Reform Commission, and I defended caucuses in that commission because I deeply believe that each state should have the ability to decide how they're going to do their presidential primary process. And that should be left up to the state. A smaller state could handle a caucus. A big state like New York or Florida should definitely not do a caucus. There's just too many people and it would disenfranchise voters. So, some people get mad at me that I defended caucuses, but there is a role for a caucus system. Minnesota has a regular primary, but then they do a caucus system to do endorsements of candidates in primaries and to do party building activities on how they elect their county officials and their state party officials. Caucuses bring people together in a sense of community where you're meeting people in our rural communities. Right. It's really a beautiful thing to see. Like I remember going to the caucus in Adams County where I live, and people looked around and said, "Oh my God, I didn't know you were a Democrat." And it was like, it made you feel good. And that Here we are, we're not alone. So that's the pluses of caucuses. There are a lot of downsides of caucuses, which we saw on full display in Iowa and even in Nevada, which had a successful caucus. But I ran a caucus site for Nevada, and it took us 4 hours to sign people in. It is a paper and pen process. You had older people waiting in line. We tried to get as many old people in line. 10 of our volunteers didn't show up. So there was like 6 of us running a caucus location for, 800 voters. So, I don't think that as a party, we will see caucuses in 2024. And I think instead, as a party, we should be pushing for same-day voter registration and as much vote by mail as possible. Those are the 2 ways that we are going to increase voting participation and for Democrats to win again.
I have 2 more questions. I appreciate the time, Jane. My thing is, as I said, I'm a Sanders supporter. I just feel like Joe Biden is probably going to win the nomination. We'll be honest with each other. But with Joe Biden, young people aren't going to come out. I feel like a lot of people in my age group were disenfranchised. You look at what happened in Iowa. You look at what happened also in Michigan, where there was, I'm on Twitter all the time looking at news stuff. And they said at Michigan State, University of Michigan, a lot of the lines were so long, a lot of kids had to go to work. They couldn't vote. We look at what just happened on March 17th with people that couldn't, probably was scared to go out and vote in general. And even Senator Sanders said, hey, if you want to go out and vote, you can. He didn't want to push anybody, and I see where he's coming from. He's in a lose-lose situation. If he says don't go out and vote because of the virus, people aren't going to vote. If he says go out and vote and people get sick, they're going to blame him for that. So I just feel like with all this stuff going on, and Joe Biden, we saw the lies in the debate. We saw the lies in South Carolina where he said he didn't write the crime bill. He said that he marched with Nelson Mandela. That came out as not true. The media didn't pick up on it. Trump's going to go to the left of him on criminal justice because he had a little criminal justice or reform bill that passed. Wasn't the greatest bill, but it was something that he at least did. Hunter Biden with the $80,000 job. I just feel like this is like Hillary Clinton again. It's doom and gloom for the Democrats again. And I'm a Democrat, and I'm going to vote Democrat, but I feel like we're going to lose again, and we're going to get we're going to get 8 years of Trump, a bad environmental policy, and more crappy issues. And this country's going to be even worse trouble than it is now.
So in 2004, I was the head of the Young Democrats of America, and our party nominated John Kerry. And young voters were not enthused about John Kerry. They were motivated to defeat George Bush because of the Iraq War and many other issues, WTO, et cetera. So we developed a young voter program where we did a lot of peer-to-peer voting outreach, and we did a lot of research, right? And it's common sense, but essentially what we found is when a young person is talking to a young person, that increases the amount of likelihood that somebody's going to turn out to vote. And that it has to be a combination of talking to them at their doors or their campus, as well as where they hang out. So it has to be a combination of types of voter contact. So as a party, and as all the other progressive outside groups that are out there wanting to make sure that we're defeating Donald Trump, is we have to start to run peer-to-peer voter programs and do the job essentially that a candidate perhaps normally would have, right? Barack Obama was motivating to a lot of young voters.
Agreed.
And that may not be the case for Joe Biden, but we can take that responsibility on ourselves and run young voter outreach programs. And we actually had record young voter turnout in 2004, not because of John Kerry, but because of a lot of outside groups and donors funded a massive young voter outreach. Didn't win because John of other reasons, but I am confident that if we shift our resources to make sure that we're running young voter outreach programs, where we're running Latino outreach programs, because Latino voters obviously went more to Senator Sanders than to Vice President Biden. And that's the demographic that, this in Florida, where Cuban voters would probably vote for President Trump over Vice President Biden. So we have a lot of work to do and reach out to the different Latino communities who are going to be key, just like African Americans and Asian and Native American voters are as well. So we can't only let Joe Biden run a campaign for all voters. We have to run a campaign to get our voters out. And I know the theory is often the top of the ticket is the one that drags all those other down ballot candidates over the finish line. I'm sorry, but that theory is out the window, and it was out the window in 2008. Like, we have to realize that some people are more motivated by state legislative candidates and gubernatorial candidates and House candidates than they are for the president of the United States. So that's the other thing, like, make sure that state parties and down ballot candidates have the money to run voter outreach programs so we can help the top of the ticket as well.
It's just kind of depressing to people my age group when you go and support Senator Sanders twice, and 70% of Sanders voters voted for Hillary Clinton, and they come out and they bash Sanders voters, call us Bernie bros, say you're sexist, a misogynist. They treat us like we're Trump voters. And it's just, it's not right. And the Biden campaign is, they've kind of moved away from that a little bit now, but they were doing a lot of that stuff. And it's just depressing If you want people to come out and vote for you, you don't badmouth them or push them away. You try to come toward them. He already said, he went on Lawrence O'Donnell the other night and said he's going to veto Medicare for all. So for me, that has crappy health insurance, why would I want to go out and vote for somebody that already is saying that if they win, they're going to veto Medicare for all? So I feel like that's the problem for young people, is that they already see this stuff. And I feel like Hillary Clinton was a way better candidate as far as, you know, depth policies than Joe Biden was, just in my opinion. And I wasn't a fan of her either. But
so, I mean, the good news is Joe Biden wants to win, right? So it's going to take people that are inside the party and know his campaign manager. You know, I consider myself part of the establishment, but Tom Perez and I have butted head many a times, but we've come together many a times as well. And that's one of the big messages that I want to say to people that watch your show, is that we can start to be leaders inside the party, so we can ruffle those feathers inside the party and start to create these changes. Because I now have a relationship with Jen O'Malley Dillon. She Unity and Reform Commission manager for Joe Biden. It's going to be easier for me to talk to Jen about, hey, your climate plan is not going to motivate young voters, and let's stop talking about bashing Medicare for all and talk about how that is a baseline that we should be shooting for, that all Americans have health care. So from my perspective, we need an outside and an inside strategy. I love the outside agitators that continue to push on the party from the outside. I was one of them for many years. And we also need more people on the inside. We don't have enough reformers on the inside.
In a pandemic, this is the time we need Medicare for all.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I'll end it with that. Jane, can you tell everybody where they can get your book and where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can definitely buy it on the big box stores like Amazon and Barnes & Noble. If you go to harvestthetevotebook.com, we have links to a lot of the independent booksellers as well, including a union independent bookseller on the West Coast. And a lot of independent bookstores carry it as well, but you can order it online, both the audio and the book version. And I think, it's a short read, the audio version, which I read it, it's about 5 hours. So it'll take you that long to read it as well. And I hope that it starts to build these bridges between urban and rural.
Jane Kielib, the book is Harvest the Vote, How Democrats Can Win Again in Rural America. Jane, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Rob, talk to you soon.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Jane. Bye now.